Okay, let's dive in. You brought us some really interesting source material today. It seems to focus on this, well, very intense direct conflict that's flared up recently between Israel and Iran.
That's right. And what we want to do in this deep dive is really pull apart the material you've provided, get to the key facts, maybe some surprising details, and, the potential implications of what's described here.
Exactly, because this doesn't sound like just another skirmish. Your sources frame it as something, well, bigger, more escalatory. So straight from the material, maybe start with the timeline they lay out.
Okay, yeah. So the sources indicate that earlier this month, Israel launched some, well, pretty significant airstrikes across Iran.
Significant how? What were they hitting?
Well, according to your material, these weren't just symbolic. They hit key nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordo, which are, critical locations, but also missile launchers, IRGC command centers. The sources even mention a code name, Operation Rising Lion.
Rising Lion. Okay, so that suggests something planned, quite large scale.
Definitely sounds like it. And what the sources really emphasize is how fast Iran hit back. We're talking within 48 hours.
And how did they respond?
With large numbers of missiles and drones, targeting Israeli cities, Tel Aviv, Haifa, surrounding areas too. The source material notes dozens killed, many injured. It really paints a picture of a major retaliation.
And this is where your material draws a line, right? And saying this isn't like previous exchanges.
Exactly. It explicitly states this is not another Gaza operation. It calls it a full state confrontation. State versus state, missiles, drones, the works.
And I mentioned specific systems Iran used.
Yes, it points to actual missiles, these advanced Hajj-Qassam systems described in your source as, powerful longer range and also the use of proxy groups. Plus, there's a detail about Iranian drones apparently getting through Israeli defenses early on.
That's a significant tactical point from the source. Okay, so what about the why? What strategic goals do the sources attribute to each side here?
So for Israel, the material suggests the aims go beyond just, say, slowing down the nuclear program. It talks about targeting missile capabilities, leadership, and even potentially trying to influence Iran's internal regime dynamics.
Interesting. And for Iran's response, what were their objectives according to the source?
The sources seem to see it as partly testing Israel's defenses, showing what they can do, and importantly, using proxies alongside their own systems. It's described as asymmetric.
Asymmetric, meaning mixing conventional military stuff with, like, proxies and drones, harder to counter directly.
Precisely. That mix of state power and these less traditional methods. And all of this, of course, is happening with that big nuclear question hanging over it, which your sources definitely highlight.
Right, the nuclear context.
Absolutely. Your source material includes these warnings from experts saying Iran might potentially be close to having enough highly enriched uranium for a, let's say, basic nuclear device if diplomacy totally breaks down. That really raises the stakes.
It certainly does. And that brings us to probably the most alarming part highlighted in your sources, the escalation risks.
Yeah, this is where the analysis gets quite sobering. I mean, what happens if one side feels truly backed into a corner? The source material explicitly mentions the potential, a dark potential, obviously, for Iran to deploy chemical, biological, or maybe even a rudimentary nuclear weapon in that kind of extreme scenario.
A chilling possibility mentioned in the source. And it also flags a specific potential Israeli move.
It does. There's a note about Israel reportedly considering a special forces raid, specifically on Fordo, that deeply buried site, and potentially, the source says, using U.S. bunker busters to try and get at it.
Wow, okay. And what about the big international players, the U.S., NATO? What role are they playing, according to your material?
Well, the sources describe their direct role in the fighting as limited. Washington's providing defensive aid, that's clear. But boots on the ground military intervention, the material says that's off the table, at least for now.
So more of a supportive role, defensively, rather than direct engagement in the fight itself.
That seems to be the picture painted by the sources, yeah. Focused on defense support.
And we're already seeing wider impacts, right? The sources mention economic ripples.
Oh, yes. Your material points it out clearly. Oil prices reacting, markets getting jumpy, and, well, defense contractors likely seeing an uptick. It's the kind of global reaction you'd expect.
So stepping back a bit, what are the sort of initial takeaways or potential fallout that your sources discuss as this immediate phase wraps up?
The analysis seems to be that Israel might have scored some tactical points, maybe disrupted some things, but really tackling Iran's whole nuclear infrastructure or changing the regime, your sources see that as a much, much tougher proposition through military strikes alone, maybe even impossible.
And the way Iran responded, that asymmetric approach you mentioned, the source suggests that could actually widen the conflict.
That's a key warning in the material, yes. Using proxies, missiles, drones, that whole strategy risks pulling in other regional players or sparking, unpredictable flare-ups. It could become a much messier regional conflict, not just Israel versus Iran.
So it really feels like, as your source material concludes, the final chapter here is far from written. It leaves us, and you the listener, with some pretty big questions hanging in the air.
Definitely. Questions posed directly by the sources. Can diplomacy, maybe like the efforts mentioned around the G7, actually work to de-escalate this? Is there any chance that dissenting groups within Iran might push for a different course?
Or, and this is the worrying alternative presented in your sources, are we looking at the start of a long, drawn-out, grinding hybrid war in the Middle East? Exactly that unpredictable asymmetric conflict the material describes. These are the possibilities laid out by the sources you shared. Certainly a lot to think about.